guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me again today. As you can tell by the title, I have got yet another story for you. Today I'm going to be telling you the story of my pregnancy, labor, and delivery of my first son. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the story. Okay, so my pregnancy with my first son. If you watched my most recent story time, which if you haven't, I will put it up here and you can check that out. But if you did, you would have heard me say that I was depressed in the beginning of my pregnancy with my son. And that was because when I was pregnant with my son, I had came off of 2 very early miscarriages. So when I got pregnant again, I wasn't really happy about it. Honestly, I was terrified that I was gonna lose the pregnancy again, and I just didn't want to go through that because even though it was a very early miscarriage, it still really stung because I've always wanted to be a mom. I've always wanted children. I was just never prepared to deal with a loss of any magnitude. So I did not want to go into that again. So I knew that I was pregnant with my son for probably the first 5 weeks, but I would not take a test. My husband kept telling me to take a test, but I would not take a test. I was having so many symptoms and so many signs. I knew that I was pregnant, but I did not want to take a test because I did not want to see those 2 lines appear, because if they appeared, then ultimately I just felt like they would soon disappear, and I just didn't want to deal with that. So in the beginning of my pregnancy, I was extremely depressed. I actually ended up taking a test probably around my 7-week mark, got my positive, and after I got the positive, it was literally like all of my symptoms just started going into hyperspeed. I began dealing with extreme nausea. The nausea was super duper bad. Like, I would be having to walk around my house with a mask on, and this was pre-COVID, so wearing a mask just wasn't like a normal thing, but I could not smell, you know, the scents in my house. When someone would be cooking in the kitchen, the smell would travel through the vents and it would just make me want to vomit. So I would have to close the vents in my room and, you know, put my mask on. In another video, I'll pretty much go into all of my little pregnancy hacks on how I dealt with the nausea, but it was super, super bad. So I had to pull pretty much out all the stops to really help combat that. In addition to the nausea, I also mentioned in the last story time that I wasn't able to eat for a long time. There was a good right around 5-day period where I literally wasn't able to consume any food and really wasn't able to drink anything. And that was when I was going through my internal battle between the aversions that I was having and the intense cravings that I was having. And I also mentioned that before. I was craving all of the things that I couldn't eat. I wanted everything that I couldn't have, and I had extreme aversions to everything that I could have. So I remember I could not even look at a mushroom. It would make my skin crawl. It would make me want to throw up. I would instantly get nauseous. I couldn't see foods that we used to eat. You could not show me a mushroom. You could not show me a garbanzo bean. You could not show me anything that we were able to eat without it being literally revolting to me. It was terrible time. It wasn't morning sickness. It was literally all day sickness, all day, all night sickness. It was so, 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 so bad. But luckily it did end up passing a little bit into my 2nd trimester. So that didn't stick around for the entire time, thankfully. So minus those symptoms and things in the 1st trimester, my pregnancy with my first son was actually not the easiest. There was a lot of things that kept happening, and it just felt like there was constantly one thing after another. So while I was depressed in the beginning, I ended up getting really bad nausea, really bad aversions, and really strong cravings. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Everything else began to happen later. So my 1st trimester was pretty much dedicated to being sick. My 2nd trimester is when everything began to kind of ramp up, and honestly felt like it was going downhill for some time, but definitely ended up leveling out. So a few things that I dealt with during my pregnancy were some really difficult things to handle. So there was one day in my 2nd trimester, before I even hit 20 weeks, where me and my husband were here at the house. We were hanging out. We had some people over. We were just having a good time. And I went to the bathroom, and when I peeked at the tissue after I wiped, there was just bright red blood. That's every pregnant woman's worst nightmare, honestly, especially for me, having come off of 2 early miscarriages previously. So I call my husband and he comes in and he looks at the tissue, and we just decide that we're just gonna go to the emergency room. So we, you know, left the house and we went to the emergency room, and I remember we were just so scared. I was a wreck, but I was really trying to stay strong. It was just one of those environments where you were hypersensitive to really anything. And luckily we were able to get a sign that registered with us that let us know that our baby was okay, but they're not telling you anything because you have to wait to hear from the doctor. So I don't know if any woman has ever been in that type of situation, but it is scary when, you know, they're looking at the baby and they're just being really silent and not telling you anything because you have to wait to hear from the doctor. So it was a really scary moment, but after I got my ultrasound, we were just in the room and we were really freaking out, and we had this nurse, this beautiful nurse. She had to have been an angel. She did not work at that hospital. She was actually from a hospital in a different state, but she volunteered to help and they needed some extra hands, so she came in to help, and she just so happened to be our nurse. And I say that she was an angel because she gave us a sign that resonated with us. By one, her name being a variation of the name that we were going to give to the baby when we thought it was a girl, which we did. We really did think it was a girl, so that was like a sign for us in that moment. It was that, but it was also the fact that she saw and she understood the extreme amount of like fear and anxiousness that we were feeling. So she opened up the notes on the computer and she pretty much talked us through how to peek at it. And she was saying, you know, it's
not in my control if you look and you happen to look and read right here where it says this.
She did a lot of that. And when we finally caught on, my husband was able to read and see that the baby was okay and everything was normal. So that was really a beautiful moment for us. And I'm just so grateful to that angel of a nurse because she really kind of helped usher us through that moment in time. But after that, so much stuff happened. So maybe in a separate video, I'll go into extreme detail on the number of things that happened and kind of isolate those events and really talk about them in more depth. But I really want to get through the story because I know that I talk a lot. So I'm just trying to hurry up and speed through this. The other thing that happened was there was another ultrasound. I'm pretty sure that this ultrasound was the anatomy scan. And, you know, we found out that we were having a boy. One of the things that we also found out was that he had abnormal results. There was a couple of white spots and, you know, things of that nature on the ultrasound, and they were saying that they were markers for Down syndrome. So my midwife called me to tell me about the results, and she called me to ask me if I wanted to have a follow-up test done to confirm or deny whether or not my baby would have Down syndrome, and if he did, to ask me if I would want to terminate the pregnancy, which was a terrible thing, and it was a terrible thought, and I just couldn't believe that I was in the place where they would pose this question to me for me to have to make such a decision. Obviously, the decision for us would be no matter what to have our baby, but just the mindset of initially hearing, oh, there could be something wrong with your baby. Do you want to keep it or terminate it? It was weird. So I called my husband because he was at work, and I just told him what they said, and I had my little brief breakdown. You know, you kind of have to take 5 minutes to yourself to just cry, and then you can be more effective in your decision making and really think about things a little bit more rational. So after I had my little brief moment, we decided, like, no, we're not going to get another test because if he has it, he has it. If he doesn't, he doesn't. And we'll just deal with it when it gets here because, of course, we're not going to terminate a pregnancy just because of the possibility of the baby having Down syndrome. It's just absurd. So crisis averted, push that aside, move on, move forward. The next thing that happened was my vagina fell out. Okay, so my vagina didn't fall out, but I ended up getting a prolapsed bladder. I had a cystocele, and before I knew what it was, I was very certain that my vagina fell out. So all I have to say to that is, girl, do your Kegels. Do your Kegels. They're not joking when they say you need to strengthen your pelvic muscles. My pelvic muscles were extremely weak and could not handle the weight of my baby, and I ended up getting a prolapsed bladder. There are different types of prolapses that people can get. You could get a prolapsed bladder, you could get a prolapsed uterus, and you can get a prolapsed rectum. I just looked up prolapse, and it is accurate to say that my vagina fell out. Google it. Google prolapse. My vagina fell out. But it's okay. It went back. Anyway, so I wasn't doing my Kegels. The integrity of my pelvic muscles were very, very weak, and my vagina ended up falling out, and I had a grade 2 cystocele, and we weren't sure if, you know, that was going to pose any issues when it came to the birth of my son. Luckily, it didn't, but it was still a thing that happened where, you know, you kind of had to process like, well, your vagina fell out. How do you put it back in? Who knows? So that was the pregnancy. It wasn't as smooth, obviously, as I would have hoped it was, but it was fine. However, I did end up remaining pregnant way longer than he was due to be born. So my son was due on January 1st, 2018, and he was born on January 15th, 2018. So he was a good 2 weeks late. And at my birth center, they do not allow you to go beyond 2 weeks. Otherwise, they would have to send you to the hospital so that you can be medically induced to bring baby on. But during that last week, we really did everything that we could to bring baby on his own. So January 8th, at the top of that week, I had 2 non-stress tests because they wanted to make sure he was fine, I was fine, everything was fine. And I had my membrane sweat, which hurt terribly bad. But at one of my non-stress tests, I believe it was my second one, he wasn't moving and they were concerned about him. So what they did was they sent me to get an ultrasound just to make sure everything was okay. So same day I went to go have an ultrasound, and the ultrasound tech was, you know, moving the wands around my belly for a good 30 minutes and baby would not move. He would not move. Honestly, I really believe in energy, and I'm certain that baby didn't move because that ultrasound tech was not a nice man. He was very irritable. He just had a bad vibe about him, and honestly, it just felt like he didn't want to be doing his job. He was moving the wands around my belly to try to make sure that baby was okay and everything, and when baby wasn't moving, he started like shaking my stomach. He took the ultrasound wand and banged it on my belly, like, I kid you not. This man was insane. Like, the amount of stuff that he did to try to bring my son on was almost like offensive, and I'm low-key glad my son didn't move for him, because we don't move for people who act like that. We don't move for people who treat us like that. You asked me nicely, sir. You asked me nicely. So he leaves the room for like 15 minutes afterwards, and he comes back and, you know, tells me that my midwife wants to talk with me. What they were trying to tell me on the phone was like, oh, we're really concerned about the baby. The ultrasound tech is suggesting that you go into the hospital and get induced because, you know, baby's not responding. And we were like, no, we're not gonna do that. Baby's fine. I'm sure he's just sleeping or something, but he's fine. I'm not concerned. He moves normally any other time. I'll keep you posted, but we're not gonna do that. We're gonna wait until we get to that 2-week mark. So that's what we did, and literally I left that ultrasound place. I went and I got some food, and as soon as I ate, he was moving, dancing, kicking, hitting. He was doing all of the things. He was doing all the things, and that's why I knew, like, my son does not respond to people telling him what to do. You ask him. And actually what's really funny is he is still that person to this day. My son, at his ripe young age of almost freedom, does not like to be told what to do. He likes to be asked, and he likes to be presented with an option. He's so independent. It's hilarious. Anyway, so what we did do though was agree to have an additional ultrasound the following morning just to make sure that baby was okay, and we had the ultrasound and he was fine and everything was cool. So come Friday, which was January 12th, we were given a stim kit to take home to do over the weekend to see if we can get baby to come on his own, because that Friday marked my last appointment before Monday of the next week would come, which would mark January 15th, which would be the day that I would have to go and get medically induced at the hospital if baby still did not come on his own. So on Friday, January 12th, they gave us something called a stim kit, and I'll link the blog post that I wrote that details all of this stuff in the description box below. But what a stim kit was pretty much like a paper that had a clock on it, and it was a little timetable where you do things in 15-minute increments, and you do it over 4 hours. So for 4 hours, you're doing something different every 15 minutes. So it'd be stuff like using your breast pump for 15 minutes, then bouncing on your birth ball for 15 minutes, then doing a belly massage using castor oil for 15 minutes, and so on and so forth, right? So we were doing that for 4 hours, and halfway through, I realized that I was doing it wrong. There were tinctures, and you were like supposed to take like a full thing of it, and I was only taking a few drops. So I did it completely wrong, and I was having no progress, so we decided to do it for an additional 4 hours the right way. So that's what we did, and I had a few contractions here and there, but it was nothing consistent, and it was nothing that lasted. So it was really very discouraging, honestly, because I was really not trying to go to the hospital. So this was Saturday, January 13th. So after we finished the stim kit, we finished around like 8 p.m., something like that. After we were done doing it properly, we just like continued on about our night, right? I don't know why, I don't know how, but for some reason, my husband and I got into an argument. And my thing that I used to do, I don't do it anymore, but my thing that I used to do when we would be at odds would be to leave the house and go to Walmart and walk around just to kind of clear my mind and like have my woosah moment, right? So I go to Walmart and it's like 12 a.m. and I'm sitting in the parking lot and I had a full-on breakdown. If you're familiar with me, you'd know that like writing is like my thing. Writing carried me through a lot. But if you're not, then now you know, because I just told you. But that's why I have my blog. It's like my internet diary. It's what I'm able to do to kind of get my outlet, because writing is very meaningful to me. It's not just a hobby. It's something that, you know, it's at my core. So I'm sitting in the parking lot of Walmart and I'm like typing in the notes on my phone and I'm having a full-on breakdown because I was so defeated. I was so over everything. I was so over being pregnant. I was so over being 2 weeks late and trying to be conducive with trying to bring this baby on, because it's like the most contradictory thing to like not worry and not stress so that you can bring your baby on. But it's so stressful trying to do everything and be okay and just be free to bring your baby. So it was a really hard time, and I just had a full-on breakdown, and I wrote and I had my release, and then my husband came and found me at the Walmart, and you know, we had our moment and we made amends or whatever, and we were driving back home and I was in my car by myself, and it's about a 15-minute drive from the Walmart back home. And as I'm driving home, I'm just talking to myself, I'm talking to my baby, I'm talking to God, I'm talking to the universe just out loud, and I'm just affirming and releasing. I'm affirming and I'm releasing because it wasn't in my hands anymore, and I just had to let everything know that I was ready. I was in alignment. So I started saying things like, I was born to do this. I was made for this moment. I was made to birth this baby. I can do this. I am ready to do this. So on, so forth. Just 15 minutes of positive affirmations. Okay, so 15 minutes of positive affirmations, and I did it the whole ride home. And I said so much. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to remember everything that I said, but I know that it was very uplifting, it was very empowering, and it was very powerful. And it just created this environment that was just so beautiful and just so conducive for things to start happening. So that being said, we get home, and like I said, this is January and I live in Virginia. So in January in Virginia, it was pretty cold outside. So we're walking in the house, and you know, we're walking up the stairs, and I just start feeling this warmth fill my pants. So I'm like, Brandon, I think my water broke. So at this point, we're like getting in the house and I'm telling him like, I think my water broke, and I'm like having him feel, and I go in the bathroom and there was another gush. And I remember I was just so happy because I was like, it's happening. And I knew that it was only happening because I had released and affirmed and released and affirmed. That's what I did. Relax, relate, release.
Relax, relate, release. Relax, relate, release. Relax, relate, release. Relax, relate, release. Yes.
I knew that that was why, and I was just ecstatic. My water broke at like somewhere around 1 a.m. and nothing happened after my water broke. Nothing happened after that. I called my midwife, I did, and I told her that my water broke because I was just so excited. And she was just telling me, you know, to keep an eye on everything because I had tested positive for GBS during my pregnancy. Since my water broke, I was only allowed to labor 18 hours. Otherwise, I would have to go to the hospital and get induced and have my baby there. Because the risk of infection is higher the longer that he is in there and the less fluid that is inside of the womb. So pressure was on. Now I went to sleep and I slept like a baby. I did not have one contraction. I did not have one Braxton Hicks. Like there was nothing going on. I had the most peaceful, most restful sleep that I had probably had my entire pregnancy. And honestly, I don't think that that was by mistake. That was probably another divine thing that happened. It was for a reason because I needed all my energy to get me through what was gonna happen the next day. So Sunday morning, January 14th, my husband and I are up and we're ready to get things going. We had a plan with my midwife. My midwife wanted us to do another 4-hour round of the STEM kit first thing in the morning. And when we were done, she wanted us to come into the birth center so that we can do more heavy duty natural induction there. So that's what we did. We had agreed to meet at the birth center by like 1 p.m. but we didn't leave the house until about like 1:45 because I was getting ready to go and I was having contractions after we had finished our STEM kit. So we were kind of just like vibing out and just kind of being slow to get ready because it was a beautiful day. Honestly and truly, it was such a beautiful day. The energy of that day was just so wonderful and it was so infectious. So we ended up getting to the birth center closer to 3:30, but it was completely fine. Everything was cool because the contractions had stopped. I wasn't following no specific timetable. The important thing was that they were coming. So anyway, we slowly made our way to the birth center. Like I said, we got ourselves showered, we got ourselves dressed, we stopped on the way at our favorite place to pick up some food, and then we got to the birth center, like I said, a little bit closer to 3:30. So we go inside and at 3:45, my midwife inserts a Foley bulb with water in it to weigh down my cervix and to help it kind of open up. So I had forgot to say this earlier. The week prior, I was only 0.5 centimeters dilated and about 75% effaced. So I wasn't really making any true progress. But when I got to the birth center around 3:45, when she was putting the Foley bulb in, she was able to check and see that I had made it to 3 centimeters dilated. So she inserted the Foley bulb catheter and filled it with some water to weigh down my cervix so that it can begin to open up. While I had the Foley bulb in, she wanted me to walk around the birth center so that I can start my contractions. When I tell you those contractions started instantly, they started instantly. I was walking around the birth center for maybe 10 minutes before I was like having to stop and hold on to the wall while I was contracting. And I was holding onto the wall because my husband was not there because he went to go get me a Frosty, which we thought at the time was a good idea, so that I can consume castor oil. Now, I'm just gonna stop here and say I do not recommend taking castor oil to induce your labor without being in the presence of a midwife or a doctor, or without a midwife or a doctor knowing that you are taking castor oil. The only reason why I took the castor oil was because I felt like I was in a comfortable, controlled environment and I would be taken care of if anything began to go wrong. So one of the things that we did after I was walking with my Foley bulb was drink 4 ounces of castor oil inside of my chocolate Wendy's frosty. Don't do that. It was disgusting. Oh my gosh, the worst thing I've ever drank in my whole life. They actually said if you're going to consume castor oil, do not put it in anything that you like, because if you put it in something that you like, you probably will not ever consume that thing ever again. And I won't. I won't. But anyway, so before my husband was able to make it back from Wendy's to get the frosty so that I can consume the castor oil, I had a really, really, really big contraction in the hallway, and the catheter kind of fell out because my cervix opened up so much. So I had that really strong contraction, and the Foley bowl fell out because my cervix had already started to open up, which was great.
After the catheter fell out, she checked me again, and I had actually made it from 3 centimeters dilated to 5 centimeters dilated.
So after that, I was really contracting kind of regularly, and it was intense. So I could not walk around the birth center anymore. I had to really do some stationary tactics because walking was done. I couldn't do it anymore. So when my husband made it back, I drank the castor oil. It was disgusting, but the idea behind it was to empty my bowels, because emptying of your bowels helps your body to contract a lot easier. So we're in the room and we're starting to try to do other things, like having me pump using my breast pump and having me bounce on my birth ball. And in between doing that, I was going to the bathroom because my bowels were fully emptying. I drank 4 ounces of castor oil. So my bowels were really, really emptying, and it was becoming intense. I was really in an intense cycle of early labor or first stage labor, and it was a lot because we were not trying to stall out. So I had to be very active and make sure I was being very intentional about everything that I was doing. Okay, so somewhere between 7:30 and 8 p.m., I got my first round of antibiotics for GBS, and I was on all fours, and one of the student midwives was using a scarfing technique so that he can descend properly and begin to obviously make his way out. I kid you not, moments after she started sifting my belly, my contractions were coming strong. So at 8 p.m., I went from early labor to full-blown active labor. And I was having contractions that were lasting 1.5 minutes every minute. So I would have a contraction for 1.5 minutes. I would get 60 seconds to break, and then I would be having another 1.5 minutes contraction. And it was like that for hours, and it was so much work. I was in the same position laboring because I just could not move. I tried earlier in the day other positions, and it just really was painful for me, and it really hurt. So the only thing that was comfortable for me was to be on my knees over my birth ball, just kind of rolling out every time I had my contraction. And my husband was right by my side, you know, rubbing my back and really kind of helping me get through my contractions. And we did that for literal hours. So at 12 a.m., we decided that it was time to move into the water. I had planned to have a water birth, and the pain was getting really, really intense, and it was getting really hard to bear. So I transitioned from my position over my birth ball into the birthing pool, and it was such a relief. The warmth of the water really helped curb the intensity of the contractions. So I was in the water contracting for about 30 minutes, and I started feeling this pressure. Literally, when the nurse helped me get into the pool, she told me if I start feeling a pressure like I have to poop, to tell her. And I was like, hey, I've been actually having that pressure for a little bit already, so what do I do? And she went and she got the midwife, and the midwife checked me around 1 a.m. and she told me when she checked me that I was 10 centimeters dilated and it was time to start pushing.
I unintentionally skipped over the pushing process, so I'll just touch on it briefly right now. I pushed my son out for 1 hour and 19 minutes in the squatting position inside of the birth pool, while my husband was outside of the birth pool supporting my weight from behind. And like I said, it was 1 hour and 19 minutes worth of pushing. I pushed every time my contractions came on. Because I was unmedicated, I felt every contraction and I felt every bit of the pushing process, which it wasn't actually extremely painful. The pushing actually made the contractions feel better. The only time that it got uncomfortable was when we got to the ring of fire, which if you know, girl, you know, the ring of fire is no joke. But other than that, the pushing process was not terrible. It didn't even feel as long as it actually was.
So I pushed from 1 a.m. to 2:19 a.m. when my son was finally born, January 15, 2018. At 2:19 a.m., which again would have been the day that I would have had to be transferred to the hospital to get medically induced. But he came right on time in his own divine timing, and it was such a miraculous and beautiful experience. It was really the moment where I felt the most powerful and the most empowered. I didn't know before then the extent of what I was able to do or the extent of what my body was able to do. So that's the reason why I love everything about pregnancy and labor and birth and just everything that follows. My son was born and he was healthy and he was beautiful and he latched immediately and just everything turned out perfect, and I couldn't have asked for a better birth experience. So that was the story of the pregnancy, labor, and delivery of my first son. He was born at a birth center. It was a water birth, and it was a beautiful intro into motherhood, and honestly, I couldn't have asked for anything better. So that's it. But definitely stick around because soon I'm going to be telling the pregnancy, labor, and delivery story for my second son, who was an unmedicated, unassisted home water birth. And I love this story. I didn't think that after I had my unmedicated water birth at my birth center, there could ever be an experience to top that. But lo and behold, my second birth of my second son exceeded that expectation completely. So definitely be on the lookout for that. That video is to come soon. But other than that, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here and go pick up my babies. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and tell me about your experiences with any of your births and how they went for you. I know that every woman is different, every pregnancy is different, every birth scenario is different. So I love all things that have to do with motherhood, pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, all of that stuff. So please, please, please go ahead and comment and, you know, tell me about it. I would love to talk to you about it and get some more information, especially in my line of work, being a birth doula, having that kind of reference of so many other birth stories really helps me perfect my craft and what I'm able to do, because it helps prepare me to be in different scenarios with different types of mothers. Anyway, I talked a lot and I'm gonna go ahead and go, but thank you so much for watching. I will definitely see you guys in my next one. Bye!